The silk of my wedding dress scraped against my skin like sandpaper. Funny how a fabric that had felt like a dream when I'd tried it on just months ago now seemed to be punishing me with every breath. The empty church echoed with my shallow sobs, each one bouncing off the stained glass and marble floors before returning to mock me. The scent of lilies, my carefully chosen flowers, now smelled sickeningly sweet, like perfume on a corpse. I sat alone in the front pew, where just an hour ago I'd expected to be standing beside David, exchanging vows and promising forever. The guests had all gone, uncomfortable whispers trailing behind them. My bridesmaids had tried to coax me to leave, but how could I? Where would I even go? Back to the apartment we shared? To my parents who had warned me he wasn't reliable? The humiliation burned hotter than my tears. "He's just running late," I had insisted, as the minutes ticked by. Then, there must be some misunderstanding, as the hour mark passed. The text came at 78 minutes. "I can't do this. I'm sorry. 4 years together, gone in 7 words. The worst part wasn't even the abandonment. It was the realization that everyone had seen it coming except me. My best friend's careful questions about whether I was sure. My mother's tight smile when we announced the engagement. The way his own mother had hugged me too tightly this morning, as if she already knew I'd need the comfort. I didn't hear the heavy church doors open at the back of the sanctuary. I didn't register the footsteps until they were halfway down the aisle, not the hesitant steps of someone unsure of their welcome, but the measured, confident stride of someone who owned every room they entered. The sharp click of expensive shoes against marble made me look up through swollen eyes. He wasn't supposed to be here. This was a wedding for David's business associates and my family, not for him. I'd only met him once, at a corporate party where David had pointed him out with a mixture of fear and reverence. "That's Matteo Vitale," he'd whispered. "He basically owns half the city. Be nice, but don't engage." I'd nodded, intimidated by the man who stood apart from the crowd, watching everything with calculating eyes. Even from across the room, I'd felt the power radiating from him, something primitive in me recognizing a predator. And now here he was, walking down the aisle toward me, while I sat destroyed in my wedding dress. Matteo Vitale didn't hurry. He moved with the casual confidence of someone who knew the world would wait for him. His charcoal suit was clearly bespoke, molding to broad shoulders that tapered to a lean waist. No flashy jewelry or gaudy displays of wealth, just a single gold signet ring and a watch that probably cost more than my car. His olive skin was smooth over sharp cheekbones, and his black hair was styled just enough to appear effortless, but it was his eyes that always unsettled me, dark as midnight, and just as fathomless. Eyes that saw everything and revealed nothing. Behind him, at a respectful distance, stood a man I recognized as one of his security personnel. The bodyguard remained at the entrance to the nave, his attention scanning the empty church. I quickly wiped my tears, a reflex of pride that seemed ridiculous given the circumstances. What did it matter if this man, this dangerous man, saw me broken? "Miss Foster." His voice was deep, accented just enough to remind you he wasn't American-born, though he'd lived here for decades according to David. "This is an unexpected situation." I let out a laugh that sounded more like a hiccup. That's one way to put it. Matteo didn't smile, but something flickered in those dark eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or assessment. He remained standing, looming over me like some beautiful, dangerous statue. "I came to pay my respects to the happy couple," he said. "Though it seems there is no couple to congratulate. Did everyone know except me?" I asked bitterly. Was it obvious to everyone that he would run? Matteo didn't answer immediately. Instead, he surprised me by sitting beside me on the pew, leaving just enough space that we weren't touching. The scent of his cologne, something expensive and subtle, sandalwood and amber, cut through the cloying sweetness of the lilies. "Your fiancé has made a grave error in judgment," he said finally, each word deliberate and heavy with meaning. "One that will have consequences." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean, consequences?" He turned slightly toward me, and I could feel his gaze like a physical weight. David owes me something far more valuable than money, Miss Foster. His behavior today suggests a pattern of unreliability. I stiffened. Please don't hurt him because of me. Whatever is between you and David, this has nothing to do with you, he cut in smoothly. Business is business. But something in the way he looked at me suggested otherwise. It made me wonder what David had told him about me, about us. The scrutiny made me acutely aware of my tear-stained face, the mascara that must be smudged beneath my eyes, my hair falling from its carefully pinned arrangement. I should go, I whispered, more to myself than to him. But where? The question had no answer. As if reading my thoughts, Matteo said, "And where will you go? Looking like a bride with no groom, back to the apartment you shared, to face your family's pity?" My hands clenched in the voluminous fabric of my skirt. "That's none of your concern, Mr. Vitale." "Matteo," he corrected, his voice softening almost imperceptibly, "and perhaps it is my concern. David has disappointed us both today." Before I could respond, the church doors opened again. My heart leapt stupidly. Was it David coming to explain, to apologize? But it was only the caretaker, an elderly man who looked startled to find anyone still in the building. "We're closing in 15 minutes, miss," he called apologetically. "I need to lock up." 15 minutes. 15 minutes to gather the shattered pieces of what should have been the happiest day of my life and decide where to go next. The panic must have shown on my face. Beside me, Matteo stood in one fluid motion and extended his hand to me. "Come with me now," he said. And it wasn't a request. I stared at his hand, strong, with neatly trimmed nails, and that gleaming signet ring. Taking it felt impossible, dangerous. Not taking it meant facing the wreckage of my life alone, walking out of this church with nowhere to go. "Why?" I managed to ask, my voice barely audible. Something like irritation flashed across his face, quickly controlled. "Because I despise waste, Miss Foster. And leaving you here like this," he gestured to my dress, to the empty church, "would be wasteful indeed." Against every rational thought, I found myself reaching for his hand. His fingers closed around mine, warm and strong, and he helped me to my feet. The vastness of my dress made me feel like I was drowning in white silk and lace. "I can't go anywhere like this," I said, gesturing helplessly at my bridal attire. "My car is at the rear entrance. No one will see you." He didn't release my hand, instead tucking it into the crook of his arm as if escorting me down the aisle. A bizarre mirror image of what should have happened today. As we walked, I was acutely aware of his bodyguard falling into step behind us, maintaining a discreet distance while scanning for threats. It should have made me feel safer, but instead it only emphasized the dangerous world I was stepping into. "I don't even know you," I said as we approached the side door of the church. "This is insane." Matteo glanced down at me, and for a split second, I caught something in his expression, a hunger, quickly masked. "You know enough, Alexandra, and right now you have few options." The use of my full name, not the Alex everyone called me, sent a shiver up my spine. He'd done his research, or David had told him more about me than I realized. Outside, a sleek black car with heavily tinted windows idled, a second security man standing beside it. He opened the door as we approached, his face expressionless. Matteo guided me toward the vehicle, his hand at the small of my back. The touch, even through layers of silk and the built-in corset of my dress, felt like a brand. "Where are we going?" I asked, hesitating at the open door. Matteo's lips curved in what might have been a smile on anyone else's face. On his, it looked dangerous. "Somewhere safe," he said. "Somewhere you can recover from today's disappointment." I should have walked away. I should have called a friend, an Uber, even my mother. Instead, I gathered the massive skirt of my wedding dress and slid into the back of Matteo Vitale's car, the man David had always told me to avoid. As the door closed behind us and the car pulled smoothly away from the curb, I caught my reflection in the darkened window. A pale bride with red-rimmed eyes, sitting beside a man who radiated power and danger. What had I just done? Where was he taking me? And why, despite everything, did I feel a twisted sense of relief to be leaving that empty church behind. The words he'd spoken echoed in my mind as the church receded in the distance. Come with me now. And I had. The car moved silently through the streets, expensive enough that the outside world seemed to disappear once the doors closed. I sat rigid, the enormity of my wedding dress taking up more than my fair share of the back seat. Matteo seemed unbothered, his posture relaxed yet somehow still commanding the space. "You're shaking," he observed after several minutes of silence. His voice was neutral, but I detected a note of concern beneath the accent. "I'm fine," I lied, watching the city blur past the tinted windows. I didn't recognize the neighborhood we were entering, sleek high-rises and exclusive storefronts replacing the familiar streets I knew. Matteo made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "You've been abandoned at the altar. You're in a car with a man you barely know, and you're wearing a dress that must weigh 20 pounds. Fine is not the word I would choose." I turned to face him, surprised by his bluntness. "What would you choose then?" His dark eyes met mine, devastated, humiliated, frightened. Each word hit like a physical blow because they were all true, but also relieved, perhaps. That caught me off guard. Relieved? Why would I be relieved? Because deep down you knew he wasn't worthy of you. The simple confidence with which he said it, not as comfort, but as indisputable fact, left me speechless. Before I could formulate a response, the car slowed and turned into an underground garage beneath what appeared to be the most exclusive residential building in the financial district. "Where are we?" I asked, anxiety climbing up my throat. "My residence," Matteo replied as the car stopped. "The penthouse has a guest suite where you can rest and change. Unless you'd prefer a hotel?" The thought of walking through any hotel lobby in my wedding dress made me cringe. "No, but I don't have any clothes, or anything, actually. My purse, my phone, even my ID were all with my maid of honor, who had probably taken them back to her place by now." "That can be addressed." He didn't elaborate, and the car door opened before I could ask what he meant. The driver held the door while Matteo exited first, then extended his hand to help me out. I struggled with the voluminous fabric of my dress, feeling ridiculous and out of place in the sterile concrete environment of the luxury garage. A private elevator awaited us, requiring Matteo's fingerprint and a code. His security remained outside as the doors closed, leaving us alone in the mirrored compartment. I caught my reflection and winced, mascara smudged beneath swollen eyes, hair falling from its pins, the elaborate beading on my bodice catching the overhead light. Beside me, Matteo looked immaculate, as though stepping into an elevator with a jilted bride was an everyday occurrence. "You're staring," I said, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "Am I?" His reflection betrayed nothing, but I felt a current between us nonetheless. "I apologize." The elevator opened directly into a foyer of gleaming marble and subdued lighting. Beyond, I glimpsed an expansive living area with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Everything was monochromatic, blacks, whites, and grays in various textures. Nothing out of place. "This way," Matteo said, leading me down a hallway. "The guest suite has everything you'll need for now." He opened a door to reveal a bedroom larger than my entire apartment, decorated in the same minimalist style as the glimpse I'd caught of the living room. A king-sized bed dominated one wall, while another featured the same dramatic city view. "The bathroom is through there," he indicated another door. "Take as much time as you need. I'll arrange for some clothes to be brought up." I nodded mutely, overwhelmed by the surreality of the situation. As he turned to leave, a sudden panic gripped me. "Wait," I called after him. Why are you doing this?" Matteo paused in the doorway, one hand resting on the frame. "Let's just say I have an interest in your well-being. Because of whatever David owes you?" Something dark flashed across his face. "David is irrelevant now. Rest. We'll talk later." The door closed softly behind him, leaving me alone in the pristine guest room of a man who, according to David, was one of the most dangerous people in the city. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the mattress barely yielding beneath my weight. What was I doing here? What did Matteo want from me? Most importantly, why did I feel safer here than I would have anywhere else? I struggled out of my wedding dress alone, which was both physically challenging and emotionally devastating. Each pearl button and crystal embellishment had been chosen with such care, each fitting anticipated with excitement. Now it pooled on the marble bathroom floor like the shed skin of a life I'd never have. The shower was complicated, multiple jets and rainfall heads with a digital control panel. But once I figured it out, I stood under scalding water until my skin turned pink. I watched mascara and expensive hair product circle the drain along with my dignity. By the time I stepped out, wrapped in a plush towel that probably cost more than my wedding shoes, exhaustion had replaced panic. I found a silk robe hanging on the back of the bathroom door, new, tag still attached. It fit perfectly, which was unsettling. Had Mateo guessed my size, or was this just a lucky coincidence? A soft knock at the door startled me. "Yes?" I called, tightening the robe's belt. "I've left some items for you outside the door," came Mateo's voice, slightly muffled. "When you're ready, I'll be in the living room." I waited until his footsteps receded before opening the door. A large box sat on the floor, the kind high-end department stores use for clothing deliveries. Inside, I found jeans in my exact size, a cashmere sweater, underwear with tags still attached, which made me blush, and even a pair of simple ballet flats. At the bottom of the box was a toiletry kit containing basic makeup, a hairbrush, and personal care items. How had he arranged all this so quickly? I glanced at the clock by the bed. I'd been in the shower longer than I realized, almost an hour. Still, the efficiency was unnerving. I dressed quickly, grateful for the soft, normal clothes after the constriction of my wedding gown. The sweater was a deep burgundy that complemented my fair skin and dark hair. Everything fit as if it had been selected specifically for me. Before leaving the room, I caught my reflection in a full-length mirror. The woman staring back looked nothing like a jilted bride, just tired, slightly wary, but put together. I gathered my damp hair into a loose knot at the nape of my neck and took a deep breath. Finding my way back to the living area wasn't difficult. The penthouse was sprawling, but logically arranged. Mateo stood by the wall of windows, a tumbler of amber liquid in hand, gazing out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk. He'd removed his suit jacket and loosened his tie, the subtle change making him appear marginally more approachable. He turned as I entered, his eyes taking in my appearance with that same inscrutable expression. "Better?" "Yes," I admitted, stopping several feet away from him. "Thank you for the clothes, and everything, I guess." He inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. "Are you hungry?" The question made me realize I hadn't eaten all day. Too nervous this morning, then too devastated afterward. "Starving, actually." "Good." I took the liberty of ordering dinner. It should arrive shortly. He gestured toward the sleek kitchen area where the island had been set for 2 people. "Would you like a drink while we wait?" I nodded, following him to a built-in bar where bottles of premium liquor gleamed under subtle lighting. "Whatever you're having is fine." He poured me a whiskey, neat, and refreshed his own glass. Our fingers brushed as he handed it to me, the brief contact sending an unexpected jolt through my system. "Two unexpected changes," he said, raising his glass slightly. I gave a humorless laugh. That's certainly one way to describe today. The first sip burned pleasantly down my throat, warming me from the inside. I wandered toward the windows, taking in the spectacular view of the city below. "How long have you lived here?" I asked, searching for neutral conversation. 5 years, Mateo answered, coming to stand beside me. "Though I'm rarely here for extended periods." "Business travel?" His lips quirked in what might have been amusement. "Something like that." The deliberately vague answer reminded me exactly who I was with. David had never explicitly said what Mateo did, just that he was connected, powerful, and not someone to cross. The expensive penthouse, the security, the air of authority. It all fit the image of a man with dangerous influence. "So what happens now?" I asked, turning to face him. "You rescued me from the church, gave me clothes and shelter. What do you want in return?" Mateo's expression hardened slightly. "Do you think I expect payment?" "Everyone wants something," I replied, surprising myself with my boldness, especially men with power. He studied me for a long moment, those dark eyes giving away nothing. "What I want, Alexandra, is for you to recover from today's incident." Then we can discuss other matters. What other matters? I pressed, unease prickling along my spine. Before he could answer, a discreet chime sounded. Dinner, he said, setting down his glass and moving toward the elevator. A minute later, he returned with several covered trays, which he arranged on the kitchen island with practiced efficiency. When he lifted the covers, the aroma of exquisite Italian cuisine filled the air. Risotto, sea bass, roasted vegetables, and fresh bread. Please, he gestured to one of the stools at the island. I took a seat, surprised by how quickly my anxiety was replaced by hunger at the sight and smell of the food. Matteo placed a linen napkin in my lap, with an old-world courtesy that seemed at odds with his otherwise modern demeanor. This is from Valentino's, isn't it? I recognized the distinctive preparation of the sea base. They don't deliver. Matteo served me a portion of risotto before serving himself. They make exceptions. Of course they did. For him. We ate in silence for several minutes, the food so delicious, I temporarily forgot the strangeness of my situation. Matteo ate with the same controlled precision he seemed to do everything else, his movements economical, yet elegant. May I ask you something? I said finally, setting down my fork. He nodded once, his attention fully on me. How do you know David? He mentioned you once or twice, but never explained how you were connected. Matteo took a sip of water, considering his response. Your former fiancé approached me for a loan 2 years ago. His business was failing, and traditional banks had turned him down. I blinked in surprise. A loan? But he told me the business was doing well. It wasn't. It still isn't. His tone was matter-of-fact. David has been living beyond his means for quite some time. The impressive apartment, the luxury car, the expensive restaurants, all maintained through increasingly desperate financial maneuvers. My stomach clenched as pieces fell into place. The nervous phone calls David would take in another room, the vague explanations about work stress, the insistence that I not involve myself in our financial planning. You're saying he's broke? My voice sounded small even to my own ears. Worse than broke. He's in debt to people who don't forgive such things easily. People like you? I wanted to ask, but didn't quite dare. Is that why he ran? Because he couldn't afford the wedding? The hurt and anger bubbled up again. He could have told me. We could have postponed, done something smaller. It wasn't about the wedding, Matteo interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. David's debts go far beyond financial concerns. He betrayed certain trusts. A chill ran through me. What does that mean? Matteo's expression darkened. It means he put you in danger, Alexandra. Whether he knew it or not. In danger from whom? From people who would use you to get to him. Or to me. My fork clattered against the plate. To you? What do I have to do with you? Matteo pushed his plate away slightly, his dinner apparently forgotten. David didn't just borrow money, he offered something in exchange. Information about my business interests, information that, if it reached certain parties, would be problematic. He spied for you? I was having trouble processing what I was hearing. He offered to. His position at the investment firm gave him access to certain financial movements that interested me. Matteo's voice remained calm, as if discussing the weather rather than what sounded like corporate espionage. When I discovered he was selling the same information to others, things became complicated. My head was spinning. The David I knew, or thought I knew, was ambitious but ethical, driven but honest. Had I been completely blind? I don't believe you, I said. Though even as the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't true. The pieces fit too perfectly, explained too many inconsistencies I'd noticed but ignored. You do, Matteo countered softly. You've suspected for some time that David wasn't being truthful with you. You just didn't want to see it. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I'd cried enough today. So what now? Am I some kind of collateral damage in whatever game you and David were playing? No. The single word carried such conviction that my eyes snapped to his. You are not collateral, Alexandra. You are the reason I was at the church today. What do you mean? Matteo's gaze was intense, almost burning in its focus. I came to warn you. David disappeared 3 days ago after I confronted him about his betrayal. When I learned the wedding was still proceeding, I knew something was wrong. You came to stop the wedding, The irony was almost too much. I came to protect you, he corrected, though it seems David made his choice clear by not appearing at all. The implications of what he was saying slowly sank in. So David is, what, on the run? Matteo nodded once. And he left you to face the consequences alone. That is something I cannot forgive. The way he said it, the quiet intensity, the hint of barely restrained fury, made me realize that whatever was between Matteo and David went beyond business. There was something personal at stake. Why do you care what happens to me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Matteo stood, coming around the island to stand beside my stool. Up close, the subtle scent of his cologne enveloped me again. When he spoke, his voice had dropped to match my whispered question. Because, Alexandra, you were never meant to be his. His words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I stared up at him, trying to process what he meant, what he was suggesting. The intensity in his dark eyes made my breath catch. What are you talking about? I finally managed, my voice unsteady. Matteo reached out, his fingers lightly brushing a strand of hair from my face. The gesture was gentle, almost tender, yet something in it made me shiver. David knew exactly who you were when he pursued you, he said, his accent thickening slightly, just as he knew what it would mean to me. I stood abruptly, needing distance from his overwhelming presence. I don't understand. I'd never even met you before that business party 6 months ago. But I knew of you, Matteo replied, allowing me the space I'd created. Your father worked for me years ago, before his accident. The mention of my father sent a jolt through me. He had died in a car crash when I was 19, leaving my mother and me with little more than memories and mounting debts. I dropped out of college to work full-time, putting my dreams of finishing my degree on indefinite hold. My father was an accountant for a shipping company, I said carefully. One of my shipping companies, Matteo corrected. Marco Foster was an excellent accountant, loyal, discreet. My mind raced, trying to reconcile this new information with what I knew of my quiet, hard-working father. He'd never mentioned working for someone like Matteo Vitale. He spoke of you sometimes, Matteo continued. His brilliant daughter who was going to be the first in the family to graduate college. He was very proud. A lump formed in my throat. If you knew my father, why wait until now to approach me? Why not come forward after his death? Matteo's expression softened marginally. I respected your grief, and I provided for you and your mother in other ways. What do you mean, provided for us? The life insurance policy that covered your father's hospital bills and funeral expenses, the scholarship fund that would have seen you through graduation, had you not declined it to work instead. I stared at him in shock. That was you. But the insurance, we were told it was a policy through his work that we didn't know about. It was more comfortable for everyone to believe that, he said simply. My legs felt suddenly weak, and I sank onto one of the sleek couches. So all this time, you've been what? Watching me from a distance? Matteo remained standing, his posture relaxed, but somehow still commanding the space. Ensuring your well-being, yes. Until David entered the picture. And what? You didn't approve of him dating me. Anger began to replace confusion. Did you have me investigated? Did you have him investigated? Of course. He didn't even attempt to deny it. When one of my most trusted employees' daughters becomes involved with someone in David's position, it warrants attention. That's invasive and controlling, and it revealed that David approached you deliberately, knowing exactly who you were and what you meant to me. I shook my head, trying to clear it. This is insane. I met David at a coffee shop. It was completely random. Nothing about David Miller is random, Matteo said, his voice hardening. He researched you, orchestrated your chance meeting, and pursued you with specific intent. What intent? I demanded. What could he possibly gain from dating me? Matteo finally moved to sit across from me, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Leverage, Alexandra. He thought having you would give him protection from the consequences of his actions. Having me, I repeated flatly. Like I'm some kind of asset. In his eyes, yes. Matteo's gaze never left mine. In mine, you are something far more valuable. The way he said it, low, intense, almost reverential, sent a confusing mix of fear, and something else, something warmer, through me. "So, what now?" I asked, trying to refocus. "David's gone. Whatever plan he had clearly failed. Where does that leave me?" "In danger," Matteo replied bluntly. "David betrayed not just me, but others with fewer scruples about how they extract payment. People who know about your connection to him. But we don't have a connection anymore. He left me at the altar, which only makes you more vulnerable in their eyes, an easier target, unprotected and emotionally compromised." I ran a hand over my face, feeling the exhaustion of the day's events catching up with me. "This is unbelievable. Yesterday I was worried about wedding seating arrangements, and now you're telling me I'm being targeted by... what, exactly? The mob?" Something like amusement flickered in Matteo's eyes. "Not exactly how I would characterize it, but close enough." "And you're what? Offering me protection?" I laughed, but it came out brittle. "Out of respect for my father." Matteo was silent for a long moment, studying me with those impenetrable dark eyes. "Not entirely," he finally said. Before I could ask what he meant, a phone rang. Not the typical smartphone chime, but an old-fashioned, harsh trill. Matteo pulled a device from his pocket that looked more like a secure satellite phone than anything available on the consumer market. "Scusami," he murmured, standing and moving toward the windows as he answered in rapid Italian. I couldn't understand the words, but the change in his demeanor was immediate and striking. The man who had been sitting across from me, intense but controlled, was replaced by someone harder, colder. His voice remained low, but there was steel in it, authority that expected and received immediate compliance. When he ended the call, he stood for a moment with his back to me, shoulders tight with tension. Then he visibly composed himself before turning. "I need to step out briefly," he said, his voice back to the smooth, accented tones I'd grown accustomed to. "Security will remain in the building. You'll be safe here." "Wait." I stood, panic flaring unexpectedly at the thought of being left alone. "You can't just drop all this on me and then leave." Matteo approached me, stopping close enough that I had to tilt my head slightly to maintain eye contact. "I understand this is overwhelming, but there are matters that require my immediate attention if I am to ensure your continued safety. And I'm just supposed to sit here and wait?" His hand came up to cup my cheek, the touch startlingly warm against my skin. "Rest. Process what I've told you. I won't be long." Something in his touch, in the gentleness behind those dangerous eyes, made my objections die in my throat. I nodded mutely. "Good," he said softly, his thumb brushing once across my cheekbone before he withdrew his hand. "Try to sleep, Alexandra. Tomorrow we can discuss more permanent arrangements." Permanent arrangements. The phrase hung in the air as he retrieved his suit jacket and straightened his tie, once again becoming the impeccable, intimidating figure I'd first seen walking down the church aisle. At the elevator, he paused. "Alexandra?" "Yes." "I am truly sorry about today. No one deserves such treatment, least of all you." The sincerity in his voice was unexpected, making my throat tighten with emotions I couldn't identify. Before I could respond, he was gone, the elevator doors closing silently behind him. Alone in the vast penthouse, I wandered back to the windows, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there was the life I thought I would be starting today as David's wife. The honeymoon we'd planned, the apartment we'd shared, the future we'd mapped out, all of it had been a lie, apparently. A calculated move in some game I hadn't even known I was playing. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, trying to organize my thoughts. If what Matteo said was true, and despite my initial resistance, I was beginning to believe it was, then my entire relationship with David had been built on deception. He'd pursued me because of my connection to Matteo, a connection I hadn't even known existed. But why would Matteo care who I dated? What was I to him beyond the daughter of a former employee? There was something he wasn't telling me. Something that explained the possessive edge in his voice when he said I was never meant to be David's. Exhaustion pulled at me, the emotional trauma of the day finally catching up to my body. I made my way back to the guest suite, collapsing onto the enormous bed, still fully dressed. Questions swirled in my mind, but the pull of sleep was stronger than my confusion. My last conscious thought was of Mateo's touch on my cheek, gentle despite everything I knew about him, everything I'd learned today. I woke disoriented, the unfamiliar room briefly confusing me before the memories of the previous day came flooding back. My wedding. David's abandonment. Mateo's rescue and revelations. The clock beside the bed read 3:17 a.m. I'd slept for hours, yet still felt drained. I changed into silk pajamas I found in a drawer, again, perfectly my size, and tried to go back to sleep, but my mind was too active now. After tossing and turning for 30 minutes, I gave up and padded out to the kitchen for water. The penthouse was dimly lit by subtle recessed lighting, giving the space a different character than it had during the evening, less intimidating somehow, more like a home than a statement of power. I was startled to find Mateo sitting in the living room, a tablet in hand and a half-empty glass of what looked like scotch on the table beside him. He'd removed his tie and unbuttoned the top of his shirt, his hair slightly disheveled as if he'd been running his fingers through it. He looked up as I hesitated in the hallway. "Alexandra, you should be sleeping. So should you," I countered, continuing toward the kitchen. "I just wanted some water," and I heard him set down the tablet as I filled a glass from the filtered tap. When I turned, he was standing at the edge of the kitchen area, watching me with that same inscrutable expression. "You've been working this whole time?" I asked, nodding toward the tablet. There were matters that needed attention. Dangerous matters? I didn't know why I asked, except that in the liminal space of the early morning hours, normal filters seemed less important. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Some. Nothing that need concern you." I took a sip of water, studying him over the rim of the glass. In this light, with his guard marginally lowered, Mateo looked almost human, still dangerous, still powerful, but less like the untouchable figure who had walked into the church, and more like a man carrying heavy burdens. "I've been thinking about what you said," I ventured, "about David and my father and everything." Mateo waited, neither encouraging nor discouraging me from continuing. "I still don't understand why," I admitted. "Why would David think I could be leverage against you? Why would you care enough about me to intervene?" He was silent for a long moment, considering me with those fathomless eyes. "Your father and I were more than employer and employee, Alexandra. We were friends. When he died, I promised to look after you and your mother. That doesn't explain why David thought having me would give him protection from you, or why you said I was never meant to be his." I set down the water glass, gathering my courage. "There's something you're not telling me." Mateo's expression shifted subtly, something like respect flickering in his eyes. "You're very direct. It's been a confusing 24 hours. He inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Walk with me," he said, gesturing toward the wall of windows overlooking the sleeping city. I followed, hyper-aware of his presence beside me as we stood side by side, looking out at the urban landscape below. "Your father asked something of me before he died," Mateo said finally. "Something I've honored for years, despite complications." "What did he ask?" Mateo turned to face me, his expression more open than I'd yet seen it. "He asked me to keep my world separate from yours, to ensure you had a normal life, free from the complexities of my business interests." I took a step back, processing his words. "My father wanted to keep me away from you?" "Why? Not from me specifically," Mateo clarified. "From my world. From the dangers and complications that come with it." "And what world is that exactly?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer from David's warnings, from the security personnel, from the power that seemed to radiate from the man standing before me. Mateo's eyes never left mine. "I think you know, Alexandra. I want to hear you say it." A hint of approval flickered in his expression at my directness. "I control certain interests in this city, shipping, real estate, import, export, some legitimate, others less so." "You're in the Mafia," I said bluntly. His lips quirked. "That's an oversimplification, but not entirely inaccurate. I lead an organization with roots in Sicily. though we've evolved beyond what most people imagine when they hear that term. Despite having suspected as much, hearing him confirm it sent a chill through me. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly aware of my thin pajamas and vulnerable position. And my father worked for you, knowing this? Your father was an accountant for my legitimate businesses, Matteo said. He kept himself willfully ignorant of the rest, though I think he suspected. When his suspicions grew too strong, he asked to leave my employment. And you let him? I was surprised, given what I knew about such organizations. Of course. Marco was a friend. I arranged a position for him at another company, still within my sphere of influence, but further removed. A shadow passed over Matteo's face. His death was unexpected. A genuine accident, contrary to what you might be thinking. I hadn't been thinking that, but now that he mentioned it, doubt crept in. Was it really an accident? Yes. The certainty in his voice was absolute. I investigated thoroughly. The truck driver who hit your father's car had fallen asleep at the wheel after working a double shift. A tragedy, but not one orchestrated by enemies. Relief washed through me, followed immediately by confusion. So, if my father wanted to keep me away from your world, why are you inserting yourself into my life now? Because David Miller forced my hand. Anger flashed in Matteo's eyes, quickly controlled. When he targeted you specifically, knowing of your connection to me, he broke an unspoken agreement. He made you a pawn in a dangerous game. But what exactly was his plan? What did he hope to achieve by marrying me? Matteo moved to the sleek bar and poured a small amount of amber liquid into a glass, offering it to me. When I shook my head, he took a sip himself before answering. David was gathering information for a rival organization, using his position at the investment firm to track my legitimate financial movements, then selling that intelligence. His voice hardened. When I discovered his betrayal, he must have panicked. He accelerated your wedding plans, thinking I wouldn't move against him if he were married to the daughter of my former friend. So I was just insurance? A human shield? The hurt and humiliation of the abandoned wedding took on a new dimension, even more painful than before. In his eyes, yes. Matteo set down his glass and moved closer to me, his presence both intimidating and oddly comforting in the dim light. In my eyes, you became something I needed to protect at all costs. Because of a promise to my father, I said, trying to understand. Something shifted in Matteo's expression, a hint of vulnerability that seemed at odds with everything else I knew about him. Initially, yes, but over time, as I kept watch over you from a distance, it became more. My heart stuttered. What do you mean, more? I watched you rebuild your life after your father's death, saw your strength as you supported your mother, your determination as you worked multiple jobs. His voice was low, almost reverent. I saw a woman of extraordinary resilience, integrity, and beauty. The intensity in his eyes made it difficult to breathe. You've been watching me for years. Protecting you, he corrected. Ensuring your well-being while respecting your father's wishes to keep my world separate from yours. His jaw tightened, until David made that impossible. And now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Now you're in danger because of your association with him. Rivals who know of his connection to you might use you to draw him out, to get to me, or simply as retribution. Fear coiled in my stomach. So what happens? Do I go into witness protection or something? Matteo's lips curved slightly. Nothing so dramatic, but you need protection, my protection, until the situation is resolved. How long will that take? Days, perhaps weeks. His expression was unreadable. It depends on how quickly David can be found. The implications of what would happen when David was found hung in the air between us, unspoken, but understood. I shivered, wrapping my arms tighter around myself. You're cold, Matteo observed, shrugging out of his suit jacket and draping it over my shoulders before I could object. The garment was still warm from his body, enveloping me in his scent. That subtle cologne mixed with something uniquely him. It was absurdly large on my frame, but somehow comforting, despite everything I'd learned tonight. Thank you, I murmured, drawing it closer around me. We stood in silence for a moment, the city lights twinkling below us like earthbound stars. The unreality of the situation struck me again. Yesterday morning I had been preparing to marry David, and now I was standing in a penthouse with a man who had just admitted to being the head of what amounted to an organized crime family. A man who claimed to have been watching over me for years. A man who looked at me with a hunger he barely tried to disguise. "You should try to sleep," Matteo said finally, breaking the silence. "Morning will come soon enough." "I'm not sure I can sleep now," I admitted. "My mind is racing." He studied me for a moment, then nodded toward the kitchen. "Then perhaps some tea? I find it helps in moments of upheaval. The incongruity of a Mafia boss offering to make tea at 3 a.m. almost made me laugh. But I nodded, following him to the kitchen and perching on one of the stools while he moved with easy confidence around the space. "My mother made this blend," he explained as he prepared loose tea leaves in an infuser. "A family recipe, passed down for generations." I watched his hands, strong, capable hands that had likely ordered violence, but were now performing this gentle domestic task with surprising grace. "You mentioned your family has roots in Sicily," I said, seeking safer conversational ground. "Did you grow up there?" "Until I was 12, he replied, his accent thickening slightly with the memory. "Then my father moved our operations to America. New opportunities, he said. Do you miss it? Sicily?" The kettle whistled, and he poured steaming water into 2 elegant ceramic mugs. "Sometimes. The light there is different, clearer. The sea is bluer than you can imagine." There was a softness to his voice when he spoke of his homeland that humanized him in a way nothing else had. For a moment, I could glimpse the boy he had been before he became the powerful, dangerous man who stood before me. He placed a mug in front of me, the aromatic steam carrying notes of chamomile, lavender, and other herbs I couldn't identify. "Careful, it's hot." I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic, inhaling the soothing scent. "Thank you." Matteo leaned against the counter across from me, his own mug cradled in his hands. The domesticity of the scene was surreal after everything that had happened, everything I'd learned. "May I ask you something?" I ventured after taking a cautious sip of the surprisingly delicious tea. He inclined his head in permission. "If David hadn't targeted me, if he hadn't dragged me into this world, would you have ever approached me? Or would you have just watched from a distance forever?" Matteo considered the question, his dark eyes thoughtful. "I had resigned myself to honoring your father's wishes," he said finally. "But I cannot pretend I hadn't considered making myself known to you." A shadow of a smile crossed his face. "I had even begun transferring some of my more problematic interests to associates, considering a move toward fully legitimate business ventures." I stared at him in surprise. "Because of me? Someone you'd never even met? Because of who you are, Alexandra. What I saw in you." The weight of his words, the intensity of his gaze, made my heart race. This powerful, dangerous man had been reordering his life, his empire, around the mere possibility of meeting me properly one day. It should have frightened me. Instead, I felt an unsettling warmth spreading through my chest. "So what happens now?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. Matteo set down his mug, his expression becoming more serious. "Now you stay under my protection until David is found and the threat is neutralized. I have a property in the mountains, secluded and heavily secured. We'll leave tomorrow." "We?" I raised an eyebrow. "Don't you have an organization to run?" That almost smile again. "I can manage most matters remotely, and your safety is my priority at the moment." "And after, when David is found and the threat is gone?" Matteo was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving mine. "After, you will be free to return to your life. Or? My heart seemed to skip a beat. "Or you might consider a different path." The intensity in his gaze made his meaning clear, even if his words remained ambiguous. I should have been appalled. This man represented everything I'd been raised to avoid: power exercised outside the law, wealth gained through questionable means, a world of threats and violence. Yet in the strange liminal space of this early morning hour, with the city sleeping below us, and the warmth of his tea and his jacket enveloping me, I couldn't summon the appropriate outrage or fear. Instead, I found myself wondering what it would be like to be the focus of all that intense attention, all that carefully controlled passion, to be protected and cherished by someone with the power to reshape the world around them. "I think that's a conversation for another time," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. "After all this is resolved," Matteo inclined his head, accepting my non-answer with grace. "Of course. For now, you should rest. We leave at noon." I finished my tea, the herbs working their magic as a pleasant drowsiness began to replace the anxious energy that had driven me from bed. When I stood to return to the guest room, Matteo remained where he was, though his eyes followed my movement. At the hallway, I paused, slipping his jacket from my shoulders and holding it out to him. "Thank you. For the tea. And for telling me the truth." He took the jacket, our fingers brushing in the exchange. The brief contact sent a jolt of awareness through me that had nothing to do with fear. "Always," he said simply. "Sleep well, Alexandra." As I made my way back to the guest room, I could feel his eyes on me, protective and possessive all at once. I should have been running for the door, calling the police, reaching out to friends or family, anything but calmly going to bed in the home of a man who had just admitted to being what amounted to a Mafia don. Instead, as I slid between the luxurious sheets, I found myself wondering what the mountain property would be like, and why the prospect of going there with Matteo filled me with anticipation rather than dread. Morning came with golden light filtering through windows I hadn't bothered to cover. I woke feeling surprisingly rested, despite the emotional upheaval of the previous day. For a brief, blissful moment, I existed in the liminal space between sleep and full consciousness, before reality crashed back. My abandoned wedding, David's betrayal, Matteo's revelations, and the danger that apparently surrounded me. I showered quickly, finding fresh clothes laid out on the bed when I emerged from the bathroom, simple, expensive pieces in my exact size. A cream cashmere sweater, dark jeans, and leather ankle boots, along with necessary undergarments. The sight was both comforting and unsettling. How long had Matteo been keeping tabs on such intimate details? When I ventured into the main living area, I found him speaking in rapid Italian on his secure phone, pacing by the windows. He'd changed into dark slacks and a charcoal button-down, the sleeves rolled to reveal strong forearms. Without his suit jacket and tie, he looked marginally less intimidating, but only marginally. He ended the call when he saw me, slipping the phone into his pocket. "Good morning, Alexandra. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I expected," I admitted. "You?" "I rarely sleep more than a few hours." He gestured toward the kitchen island where breakfast had been laid out. Fresh fruit, pastries, coffee. "Please eat. We have a drive ahead of us." I took a seat at the island, selecting a croissant and some berries. "How far is this mountain property?" "About 3 hours north," Matteo replied, pouring coffee into a mug and sliding it toward me. "Remote enough to be secure, close enough to maintain necessary connections." I nodded, taking a sip of the perfect coffee. "What should I pack? I don't exactly have any of my things." "Everything has been arranged." Of course it had. "Anything specific you require, we can acquire on the way." The casual display of efficiency and resources should have been more alarming than it was. Instead, I found myself oddly comforted by his competence, by the sense that he had considered every detail. "Have you heard anything about David?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could reconsider. Matteo's expression hardened slightly. "There have been sightings near the Canadian border. He's running, as expected." I absorbed this information, surprised by my own lack of emotional response. The man I'd planned to marry was fleeing the country, and all I felt was a distant curiosity. "What will happen when you find him?" I forced myself to ask the question that had been hovering at the edges of my mind. Matteo studied me for a long moment. "Do you really want to know?" I met his gaze steadily. "Yes." "He'll be given a choice," Matteo said, his voice matter-of-fact. "Return what he stole and accept exile, or face more permanent consequences." A chill ran through me at the implication, but I appreciated his honesty. And the people he sold information to? The ones who might come after me? That situation is being resolved as we speak. The cold certainty in his voice made it clear what resolved meant. I should have been horrified. Instead, I found myself nodding, accepting his words with a calmness that would have shocked me yesterday. Had I changed so much in 24 hours? Or had something in me always understood this darker world, been prepared to accept it when necessary? "Finish your breakfast," Matteo said, his tone gentling. "We should leave soon. I don't like to keep predictable patterns." I ate quickly, aware of his occasional glances. When I finished, he led me to the private elevator, his hand resting lightly at the small of my back. The casual possessiveness of the gesture should have bothered me. It didn't. In the garage, a different car awaited us, a sleek, dark SUV with heavily tinted windows. One security man sat behind the wheel, while another stood by the rear door, alert and watchful. Both men nodded respectfully to Matteo, their eyes barely registering my presence. "Alexandra, this is Bruno." Matteo indicated the driver. "And Luca," the man holding the door. "They will be accompanying us to the property." I murmured a greeting, noting how neither man quite met my eyes. They were professional, respectful, but maintained a careful distance. I wondered what Matteo had told them about me, about my role in his life. The interior of the SUV was luxurious but understated, with supple leather seats and subtle technology integrated throughout. Matteo sat beside me in the back, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him, yet carefully maintaining a small gap between us. Bruno pulled smoothly out of the garage while Luca sat in the front passenger seat, his attention focused outward, constantly scanning our surroundings. As we drove through the city, I watched the familiar landmarks slide past, feeling as if I were seeing them from a different reality. Less than 48 hours ago, I had been a bride-to-be, planning a honeymoon, looking forward to a future with a man I thought I knew. Now I was being driven to a remote mountain compound by a Mafia boss who claimed to have been watching over me for years. "You're very quiet," Matteo observed after we'd left the city limits, the urban landscape giving way to suburbs, and then the beginning of more rural territory. "I'm trying to process everything," I admitted. "This time 2 days ago, I was getting ready for my wedding. Now you're here," he completed simply. "With me." I turned to look at him directly. "Why did you tell me everything? About my father? About David? About your organization? You could have just offered protection without explanation." Matteo's dark eyes met mine, unflinching. "You deserve the truth, Alexandra. I've watched over you from a distance for years, respecting your right to a normal life. Now that circumstances have made that impossible, I won't compound the situation with lies. Even when the truth implicates you in illegal activities," a slight smile curved his lips. "Do you plan to report me to the authorities?" "No," I answered honestly. "But you couldn't have known that. I know you," he said with quiet confidence. "Better than you might think. Your sense of justice is nuanced. You understand that sometimes the legal path is not the right one." He wasn't wrong. I'd always had a complicated relationship with strict rules, preferring to judge situations on their individual merits rather than through rigid frameworks. It was something my father and I had often discussed during my teenage years. The thought of my father brought new questions. "My mother," I said suddenly. "Is she in danger too?" "She's been under protection since yesterday," Matteo replied smoothly. "A security team is watching her home, though she's unaware of their presence." Relief washed through me. "Thank you." He inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. "It was the first arrangement I made after finding you at the church. The reminder of our meeting, of him finding me abandoned and devastated, brought a flush of embarrassment to my cheeks. I must have looked pathetic. You looked," he said carefully, "like someone who had been wronged, someone who deserved better." The intensity in his gaze made me look away, out at the passing landscape. We were entering mountainous territory now, the road beginning to wind upward through forests of pine and spruce. Occasionally I caught glimpses of pristine lakes in the valleys below, reflecting the clear blue sky. "It's beautiful here," I murmured, grateful for the change in subject. "This region has always reminded me of certain parts of northern Italy," Matteo said. Less dramatic, perhaps, but with its own quiet grandeur. We lapsed into comfortable silence as the SUV continued its ascent. After another 40 minutes, Bruno turned onto a private road marked only by an understated gate that opened automatically as we approached. No name, no indication of ownership, just tall iron gates and a discreet security camera. The driveway wound through thick forest for nearly a mile before opening onto a clearing where a house stood. Though house seemed inadequate for the structure before us, it was a modern interpretation of a mountain lodge, all clean lines and vast expanses of glass, yet it managed to blend harmoniously with its natural surroundings. Built into the slope of the mountain, it offered what must be spectacular views of the valley below. "We're here," Matteo said unnecessarily as the SUV came to a stop at the front entrance. Luca exited first, scanning the area before opening Matteo's door. Bruno remained at the wheel, alert and watchful. The air was crisp and pine-scented as I stepped out, several degrees cooler than in the city. I wrapped my arms around myself, breathing deeply. "Come," Matteo said, placing a hand lightly at the small of my back again. "Let me show you inside." The interior of the house was even more impressive than the exterior, open and airy, with soaring ceilings and walls of glass that brought the mountain landscape inside. The decor was understated luxury, natural materials in neutral tones with occasional bold accents. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall of the great room, while the opposite wall was entirely glass, showcasing a breathtaking view of the valley and mountains beyond. "This is..." I trailed off, searching for an adequate word. "One of my favorite places," Matteo finished for me. "I come here when I need to think, to plan, to be away from the complications of the city." "It's beautiful," I said simply. He watched me take in the space, something like pleasure in his dark eyes. "Your room is this way," he said after a moment, gesturing down a hallway. "I thought you might like to settle in, rest before dinner." I followed him down a corridor of polished wood to a suite that took my breath away. Like the great room, it featured a wall of glass overlooking the mountains, with a king-sized bed positioned to take full advantage of the view. The adjoining bathroom was a study in luxury, a deep soaking tub positioned by a window, a shower with multiple heads, dual vanities of marble and brushed gold. "This is... excessive," I said, overwhelmed by the opulence. Matteo's lips quirked. "I prefer comfortable." I ran my hand over the plush duvet, noting a closet door that stood slightly ajar, revealing clothing, women's clothing, already hung inside. "Everything should be in your size," Matteo said, following my gaze. "If anything is missing or not to your liking, we can arrange alternatives." The thoroughness of his preparation was both impressive and slightly unnerving. "Thank you," I said, not knowing what else to say in the face of such comprehensive care. He nodded once. "I'll leave you to settle in. Dinner will be at 7, if that suits you." "That's fine," I replied, suddenly aware of being alone with him in this bedroom, miles from civilization. Matteo seemed to sense my discomfort, taking a step back toward the door. "Alexandra," he said, his voice softening. "You are a guest here, not a prisoner. Your comfort and safety are my only concerns." I met his gaze, seeing the sincerity there. "I know," I said, surprised to find I meant it. Despite everything, his admitted criminal activities, the danger surrounding us, the strange circumstances that had brought us here, I did feel safe with him. Safer than I had with David, I realized with a jolt. "I'll see you at dinner," he said, then left, closing the door softly behind him. Alone in the luxurious suite, I sank onto the edge of the bed, trying to process the surreal turn my life had taken. 2 days ago, I'd been preparing to marry a man who, it turned out, had targeted me as leverage against Matteo. Now I was in a mountain retreat with the very man David had sought to manipulate, a man who claimed to have been watching over me for years, a man who looked at me with undisguised hunger tempered by careful restraint. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt curious, intrigued, and most disturbingly, drawn to the dangerous man who had brought me here. The afternoon passed quietly as I explored my suite and the items that had been provided for me. The closet contained an array of casual yet expensive clothing: jeans, sweaters, blouses, even a few dresses, all in my size and in styles I would have chosen myself. The bathroom was stocked with high-end toiletries, including the exact brand of shampoo I used at home. The attention to detail was both thoughtful and disconcerting. How long had Matteo been collecting this information about me? How closely had he been watching? At precisely 7, I made my way to the great room, dressed in dark jeans and a soft blue sweater I'd found among the provided clothes. Matteo stood by the wall of windows, gazing out at the twilight settling over the mountains. He'd changed into more casual attire as well. Dark slacks and a simple button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled to reveal those same strong forearms I'd noticed earlier. He turned as I entered, his eyes taking in my appearance with appreciation. "You look lovely," he said simply. "Thank you," I replied, feeling oddly shy. "This place is incredible. I'm glad you like it." He gestured toward the dining area, where a table had been set for two beside another wall of windows. "Shall we?" Dinner was a surprisingly relaxed affair. The food was excellent, a simple but perfectly prepared meal of roasted chicken, seasonal vegetables, and crusty bread, accompanied by a wine that probably cost more than a month of my former rent. Matteo proved to be an engaging conversationalist, knowledgeable on a wide range of topics, from art to history to literature. Sitting across from him, watching the play of candlelight on his features, it was easy to forget who and what he was. In this setting, he seemed simply a cultured, intelligent man, sharing a meal with a guest he wished to impress. But then his secure phone would vibrate, and he would excuse himself briefly to take a call in rapid Italian, his voice taking on that edge of command that reminded me exactly who sat across from me, a man of power, of danger, of secrets. As we finished the meal with coffee and a simple dessert of fresh berries and cream, I gathered my courage to ask the question that had been hovering at the edges of my mind all day. "What happens after this is all resolved?" I asked, meeting his gaze directly. "After David is found and the threat is neutralized?" Matteo set down his coffee cup, his dark eyes intent on mine. "That depends entirely on you, Alexandra." "On me?" "Yes." He leaned forward slightly, his focus entirely on me. "I meant what I said last night. When this is over, you can return to your life in the city, or... My heart raced despite myself. "Or you could consider a different path. With me." The directness of his statement took my breath away. "You're offering me... what, exactly?" "Everything," he said simply. "My protection, my loyalty, my..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "My devotion."